We're kicking off this explainer by looking at history, but not just as some random series of events. We're looking at it as a precise, predictable mechanism. You know, we often think of the rise and fall of civilizations as these totally unique, standalone stories. But what if they're actually following a strict, unbending blueprint? Today, we're diving into a really profound concept called the Pharaonic wave. We'll be drawing on ancient wisdom to decode these recurring patterns in human history. Patterns where the names of the empires change, but the underlying laws, they stay exactly the same.
So this brings up a huge question. Why do human societies repeatedly fall into the exact same traps of tyranny and ruination? I mean, have you ever wondered why, regardless of the century we're in or the technology we have, the collapse of corrupt structures always looks identical? Well, it's not a coincidence. It's actually an unalterable cycle of human behavior in times of crisis. And getting a grip on this blueprint is absolutely crucial if we want to see our own modern world clearly. Okay, here's our roadmap for decoding this collapse. We'll cover 1. The laws of history. 2. The Pharaonic wave. 3. Bluffing and fragmentation. 4. The triple afflictions. 5. Blaming the truth-bearers. And finally 6. The victory of Phaedra.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the laws of history, understanding Sunan. Now, take a look at this hand-drawn chart from our sources. It maps out the unchangeable cosmic mechanism of history, essentially plotting out this inevitable mathematical curve of human civilizations. You can see the timeline progressing forward, right? Humanity climbs upwards towards these high peaks of progress, but then, inevitably, dips right back down into deep troughs. It's an unceasing, dynamic flow. History isn't static. It's this continuous interaction of forces, an ongoing process of growth, decline, and rebirth.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that we are looking at repeatable scientific phenomena, a completely unalterable blueprint that governs human behavior. In our source material, this is referred to as Sunan, or the canon of the ancients. The texts remind us that we really need to look at the ruined dwellings of past nations, people who are often much greater in power and wealth than we are, and realize that they face the exact same consequences for their actions. The actors on the stage might change, but the script of history, it's entirely predictable.
Moving on to Section 2, the Pharaonic wave, anatomy of tyranny. Let's look at how tyrants actually manipulate the masses using a concept called istighfaf. Think of istighfaf as ancient political spin. It's the act of bluffing, fooling, or belittling the public to ensure their blind obedience. The sources point out that people often reject clear truths simply because they abandon their reason, preferring to swallow comforting myths instead. Istighfaf is a ruler deliberately capitalizing on that human weakness. It's about belittling the intellect of the public, making them feel small or foolish, so they'll just blindly obey out of awe or fear.
But to pull off that level of manipulation, you first have to divide the public. And that brings us to Shia, or social fragmentation. As referenced in Quranic verse 28:4, making the people into Shia, breaking them down into competing factions, prevents unified resistance. Because let's face it, you cannot oppress a totally united people. So a corrupt structure will deliberately categorize and pit people against one another. By keeping the population fractured into competing tribes, the ruling elite guarantees that the masses are too busy fighting each other to ever look up at the true source of their oppression.
Let's dive deeper into this in Section 3, bluffing and fragmentation, the tyrant's psychology.
This whole dynamic is captured perfectly in Quran 43:54. The historical example given in the texts is Pharaoh. He called out to his people, boasting about his grand kingdom and his rivers, and rhetorically asked, "Am I not better than this one who is insignificant?" He actively fooled and bluffed his people. That's the istikhlaf we just talked about. And because the people had already compromised their own moral compass, they easily obeyed. It's a two-way street, really. It requires deception from the top and willing ignorance from the bottom.
So what happens when it all falls apart? Section 4, the triple afflictions, signs of systemic collapse.
When the system finally buckles under its own corruption, the sources detail a very specific progression of catastrophes that hit the society. First up, plagues and disease. The texts describe this as swarms of locusts, frogs, and bugs just making life utterly unbearable. Second, severe economic and ecological collapse. Essentially, ancient inflation and severely dry years that cause wasting hunger. And finally, terrible bloodshed and violence, where peace is completely shattered. These aren't just random bad luck. They are the natural, inevitable consequences of a society that has corrupted its foundational laws.
And how do the people react? Section 5, blaming the truth-bearers, the reaction.
This is where human psychology gets really fascinating. Out of sheer smugness and sudden panic, the public completely misdiagnoses the root cause of their suffering. As detailed in Quran 7:13-131, during times of prosperity and abundant crops, the masses arrogantly claim, "This is deservedly ours. We earn this." But the second those severe dry years and plagues hit, they don't blame their corrupt leaders, they don't look at their own moral failings. Instead, they desperately look for a scapegoat. They blame the truth bearers, the exact people who are trying to warn them, and call them an ill omen.
Look at the stark contrast here between the actual mechanics of a collapse and the psychological delusion of the public. Reality tells us clearly that it's systematic corruption, greed, and the arrogance of the elite that bring about societal ruin and plagues. But the reaction of the fragmented masses? They double down on the delusion. They beg for the plagues to be removed, promising they'll change. But the sources note that as soon as the affliction is temporarily lifted, they swiftly renege and go right back to their old destructive ways.
So, does it end in total despair? No. Section 6. The Victory of Fitra, the Reset.
Even after total systemic devastation, something called Fitra acts as the universal blueprint for life to harmonize and rebuild from the ruins. The sources define Fitra beautifully. It's our structural ontological disposition, an innate human readiness, a primordial attunement to the laws of existence. Think of it like this. Just as the eye is naturally oriented to perceive light before it even sees a specific object, human beings are fundamentally oriented toward truth. Falsehood and tyranny might warp a society temporarily, but they go against this deep structural law of reality. Fitra is the absolute guarantee that the compass will eventually reset.
Because no matter how powerful a corrupt structure seems, it's ultimately as fragile as sea foam against the enduring purity of water. The sources use a really striking metaphor here called zabad. Zabad is that dispensable scum or froth that floats on top of flooding water, or the impurities that bubble to the surface when you melt metals. That froth? It's loud, it sits right on top, and it looks dominant, but it is utterly dispensable. It inevitably dissolves into nothing. Truth, on the other hand, is the pure, life-giving water that stays put in the earth, benefiting people and allowing existence to finally bloom again.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. If the laws of history never change, where are we on the wave today? If we can recognize the blueprint of a failing society, the bluffing of the public, the deliberate fragmentation of society into factions, and the clear warning signs of economic strain, how close are we to the crest of our own wave? If the canon of the ancients holds true, understanding these stages isn't just about knowing history, it's about navigating our present. The ultimate comfort is knowing that while the froth of falsehood may rise temporarily, the pure water of truth, guided by our innate fitra, is what will ultimately remain. Keep your eyes oriented toward the light.